Okay, and we're ready to start. Thanks very much, everybody, for joining us. On the call today, we have myself, Fionn Daly. I'm the head of marketing here at pTools. I'll be the host and the moderator. Also on the call, we have Tom Skinner, MD at pTools, Jeff Braswell, Allan Grody, and also we have Francis Gross as well. First, I'll do a little bit of housekeeping, then I'll do further introduction to our panel, and then Tom will take it from there, give a quick introduction to the theme of the webinar, and then we'll start the panel discussion in about 5 to 6 minutes. Okay, so in terms of housekeeping, if you have any questions during the webinar, please feel free to pop them into the Q&A box. You'll see that at either the top or the bottom of your screen, depending on how everything is set up. The webinar is also being recorded, so we will be sending the webinar to everybody once the webinar is finished. Yeah, so if you have any questions, pop them into the Q&A box and we'll cover those questions at the end. In terms of our panel, on the call today we have Jeff Braswell, former member of the GLEIF board. Jeff is one of GLEIF's founding directors. Jeff has recently completed a 6-year term on the board of the Global LEI Foundation, where he chaired the Technology Operations and Standards Committee. He's also the chair of the Board of Governors of the Actis Financial Research Foundation, and he actively participates in several other ongoing financial data and blockchain standards initiatives. As co-founder and president of Berkeley-based Risk Management Technologies, or MT, Jeff designed and led successful implementation of risk management solutions on high-performance computing platforms for many of the world's largest financial institutions, including Wells Fargo, Credit Suisse, Chase, PNC, Sumitomo, Mitsui Banking Corporation, Mellon, Abbey National, Wachovia Union Bank, and ANZ. Francis Gross is Senior Advisor in the Directorate General Statistics of the European Central Bank. His interests include developing vision and strategy for overcoming the dual disruption of rapid globalization and digitization, as well as designing measures with transformational power to ultimately deliver measurement tools at effective scale and speed of today's finance, especially in a crisis. His immediate focus is on real world and data world interface, primarily object identification. He serves on the Regulatory Oversight Committee of the Global LEI system and has been instrumental in the emergence and development of the Global LEI system. Also on the call today, we have Allan Grody. He's the president and founder of Financial InterGroup of companies in the USA. FIG has created and or invested in a number of startups and has patents and trademarks on breakthrough products and businesses in finance and service industry. He's been consulting domestically and internationally to financial institutions on global strategies, capital and contract market restructuring, industry-wide financial business reorientation, information systems, evolving communications infrastructures, and risk management systems. His activities have included countrywide restructuring of capital market regulations in the EC, strategic planning for the banking sector in the Persian Gulf, restructuring of capital and contract market trading in multiple market centers, and being an expert witness, given expert witness testimony on landmark patent cases related to electronic trading of financial instruments and collective fund shareholder fee issues. He's a frequent speaker, author, and publisher of research on risk management, data management, trading automation, and retirement investing as well. Tom Skinner is the founder and managing director of pTools. During his tenure at pTools, he has overseen the development of a range of risk management solutions in LEI, ISIN, corporate actions and announcements for stock exchanges, CSDs, LUs, and NNAs. He's pioneered the use of blockchain, AI, and natural language processing in helping these organizations in the space to monitor and assess the level of risk passing through their processes. He's worked with London Stock Exchange, Lux CSD, Allianz, Euronext, among other financial services companies as well. So as you see, we have quite a prestigious lineup for you today. Risk management was mentioned there a couple of times as well. So I'm looking forward to a robust discussion. But first, I'll pass you over to Tom, who will give you an introduction into pTools, what we do, and give you an overview of what the discussion will revolve around today. Thanks very much. Over to you, Tom. I think you're on mute there, Tom.
Beg your pardon. Thank you, John. I'll be brief. What we want to talk about today is what we see as a connection between these three information areas, the three information areas being ISIN, LEI, and corporate actions / announcements. And to talk a little bit now about our understanding of that from a technology perspective and from a business perspective, but ultimately the panel discussion will be about the technologies that are informing better risk mitigation and better functionality around these particular numeric systems. So to talk about the technology, in the next slide, if I may, we focus on blockchain and authorization, artificial intelligence around very specifically natural language processing, and risk mitigation using a number of data services, including biometrics and various APIs to help assess the validity and quality of the data in these systems. Moving on, what we use those technologies for is to help our clients better manage the issuance of securities numbers, that's ISIN issuance, better manage the issuance of LEI numbers, that's LEI issuance, and that is most notably on behalf of LOUs, but increasingly in terms of working with organizations who are managing LEIs or are using LEI as a starting point for referencing companies and information within their systems. And thirdly, we work with CSDs to help improve the corporate actions publishing process and the cross-referencing of those corporate actions and announcements with the companies and the products, the financial products to which they're associated, using LEI and ISIN and using the data cross-referencing, which we think is going to be a very big part of how all of these technologies evolve. And just to finish out, what that means is we're focused on NNAs, LOUs, and CSDs. Within that exchange ecosystem, as we call it, we also have clients in the central bank area, and as I said, increasingly we're talking to people who are not LOUs but are involved in the management of LEIs. So that's it. I hope I haven't gone too fast. Excuse the rapid fire. The last slide there, just to point out that we see these three things being of the one. So we see the technology, our solutions, and the clients, and across those three areas, ISIN, LEI, and corporate actions, we see the connections, be they technical connections, but also ultimately, financial services connections, which we believe is the area that we want to focus on, and we think there's a lot of great work to be done there. So I'm going to open the discussion. We have a number of questions. I'm delighted to be on this panel. Some amazing experience on the panel, frightening to be honest. And I think you have the first question, Fionn, please.
Thank you very much, Tom. A moment, I'll also turn my camera on. Yeah, so I think the first question I'll direct to Francis. It's about databases, and then we'll start the discussion off around that question. So database maintenance is essential for any database, and that could be a corner shop, it could be a bank, and it could be GLEIF and the LEI database itself. That maintenance of what is relevant and what is up to date is essential and quite difficult to maintain over time as well. So Francis, how does corporate actions announcements play a role in the maintenance of the LEI database?
Yeah, well, on the exact use of corporate actions announcements at the moment, I think Jeff has probably a better answer. But just note that the LEI is being updated once a year, which is notoriously insufficient. So corporate actions happen when things happen. and they are normally not taken into account, I would suppose. Where we need to go, though, is that corporate actions for the LEI data amendments shouldn't matter at all anymore. And let me explain a bit. Today's business process of the LEI system is that if you want an LEI, you go to a local operating unit, you ask for an LEI, you give them the data, the LOU runs to some kind of business register where you're officially registered and validates the data there. That's a cumbersome, expensive, and slow process. We need to go to another business model, which will be, well, connecting the LEI system straight to the source of official identity in real time. That means that the data for the LEI will come straight from the business register. An LEI will be issued at the business register. That will then create the need for some businesses to help connect those business registers to the LEI system, and the updating should be done real time. And that's easier than it appears. Say if you change the name of your company, you go to the LEI, to your business register, you say, I want to change the name of my company, and that name will become the official name the moment it is registered and published in the LEI system for all to see. That would be a whole different business model, and that will give the users the certainty that they have the official truth in the LEI system, so their machines or their people can go in, look up the data, don't need to verify it, it is accurate in real time. I think on the move to there, we will have a mix of business models. So some countries might, at some point, having enlightened leaders, move ahead and recognize that digital times demand digital answers, and will connect their identity creation processes, official identity creation processes, straight to the LEI system, whereas others will still rely on having LOUs doing it. There, a difference in quality will appear across the system, and that will drive probably adoption across the board. I think businesses will ask. So I would leave Jeff to answer the question on specifically what corporate actions announcements are used for.
Yeah, Jeff, do you have anything to add there relating to corporate actions announcements and how they will help maintain the LEI database or potentially do that?
No, but as Francis is aware, and also the three of us were part of the original private sector preparatory group that started designing this back in 2012. So it's nice to have a little reunion here. Mm-hmm. As there is in fact a study on how to incorporate corporate actions, and not the general form of them in terms of dividends and all that, but only the ones that relate to mergers and acquisition, which they're going to be terming entity events, where the GLEIF can provide a service to provide this to the GLEIF system of the registrars and so forth, such that the problem of annual renewals essentially would go away with notification. It is a self-registering system, so the registrants themselves have to make the updates. It's not an active system in which the GLEIF or LEUs will update records without consent. With regarding to getting more timely information, I do appreciate the notion of having LEI issuance at the business registry level. It turns out that a lot of issues when LEIs were issued, they were done recently, and a lot of business register information is in fact sometimes more stale than the recent LEI information. I do think the redundant cost of having issuance by registrars, issuance by LEUs, and KYC processes is a cost that has sort of plateaued the issuance. And in addition to business registry interaction, we also see the possibility, in fact, of having the KYC process being involved in early issuance of LEIs.
Okay. If I may just add a short one, Jeff mentioned that the business registers are not always perfect. Yes, that is true, because the identity creation processes, the formal identity creation processes, are anchored in past times. So the global LEI system, we are building a digital response to all the disruptions we see and to the needs of all businesses. So we will need to convince the governments that they need to upgrade the identity creation processes so that they are effective in the digital age. I mean, it's very difficult to build a digital solution, digital infrastructure on sometimes shoddy infrastructure. And that is also where I hope that business will go and talk to governments and tell them, guys, you need to deliver roads, because we now run Ferraris, and those forest paths don't really do the job anymore.
A nice metaphor, nice analogy. Allan, do you have any comment on corporate action announcements, and specifically around new mergers, acquisitions, and so on, and how they could potentially play a role in maintaining the LEI database?
Yeah, very quickly, the smart people in the industry way back when realized this problem with corporate actions, and that they were less than high quality because they were being processed by intermediaries and commercial vendors, and we weren't getting the data directly from the source, being the issuer of the security and the organization undergoing a reorganization. SWIFT and DTCC back in, it must have been 10 years, actually earlier than the LEI, had proposed to do a template format for corporate issuers to follow corporate actions from their initial sources through to the entire process. It was done around an XBRL template. A lot of work was done. They could not get the corporate issuers to agree because they did not see a benefit. That's still a project that needs to be done if we're ever going to get the maintenance of legal entity identifiers up to speed to where real-time systems can use it. So that was one area that showed promise, that failed, that should be resurrected. The corporate organizations are now more accessible through an organization called GS1, which owns 32 of the 72 registration agents and within the LEI system, and they should be solicited to reach out to their corporate clients, they're the barcode people, and get them on board with this process. That's number one. Number two, I agree with Jeff and don't agree with Francis. Jeff saying that we need to have direct registration from the original source, meaning the financial market participant. The business registries are $1 short and a day late, to be kind to them, and we'll never be able to get a synchronization between the needs of financial institutions who have to update their systems immediately upon filing of a new organization that they're ready to trade, versus the business registries that are government bureaucratic processes that take, and we've seen studies, and in our work with the LEI process, we've seen it up to 6 months some business registries take to update their files.
If I'm in, we wanted a robust discussion. I mean, Allan and I have always had robust discussions.
Wonderful.
Allan, you're right. In today's world, in the world of antiquated processes at business registers, but that won't do. I mean, banks, financial institutions, updating the LEI system, which ones will you believe then if you have 10 sources? I look at it more fundamentally. A legal entity, as the name says, is an entity created by law. So the creation of the identity is done by the sovereign on the basis of law. There are institutions that are tasked by the government to create that identity and to represent it, to create representation of the identity on behalf of the sovereign. Now, for a human, that is a passport, for instance, or a driver's license. For an entity, it is probably a registration certificate, depending on where you are. And that's where we need to move to a digital registration. There are countries where it works. Estonia, for instance, you sit on your laptop anywhere in the world, and in 5 minutes, you create a legal entity that's duly registered in Estonia, and the data published on the internet. They have not yet joined the global LEI system in bulk, although they want it, because at the moment, the Global LEI Foundation, by its statutes, must demand the same price for each LEI. Now, I hope that the ROC will change that policy so that the Global LEI foundation can give discount prices for bulk registration, then you will have all legal entities of Estonia registered in one go and updated in real time. That will work. And that is the solution we need to go to. What intermediate fixes we use, okay, none of them will be good. Some might be less bad.
Yeah, Tom, perhaps you could comment on some technology that could help with this, artificial intelligence, natural language processing. Would that have a role to play in tracking all this text-based information?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, technology, I'm loath to admit, is probably a big part of the answer here. And there are real world problems, as Allan has identified, and there are best case technologies to be used, as Francis has suggested. What does strike me is that, you know, time is a factor here. We see that in news feeds, regulatory news feeds, that referencing of ISIN is more prevalent than referencing of LEI, and we think that there's a time factor there. There's a learning curve there, and in fact, in some scenarios, in order to identify the LEI, we're reversing through the ISIN, which is referenced in the announcement, to cross-reference the announcement with the LEI number associated with the actual entity. So, you know, without wishing to be referee on this discussion, there are, in a way, they're two sides of the same coin. You know, there's the technology solution, and then there's the real-world application of how humans work and what they're used to in their businesses. And CSDs, you know, in terms of managing or processing announcements, and corporations in terms of processing announcements and actions, there is some conservatism, I think, in how these things are done. And perhaps an educational process or a promotional process is required to get people using the LEI marker as a definition. You know,
I think we could probably focus on this one topic for the rest of the webinar, but I think on that one, unless there's anything very important to
just a quick one, Tom.
I would like to highlight one small point. I think it could sound like we are in disagreement, but I think we are not. Say, for instance, Allan talks about what can be done now without involving government that are, say, antiquated in some areas. I look at more the solution where we need to go, which is, in my view, the only one that really works. Identity is factual in the sense that it's created by law, so no one will dispute that worldwide. Say, if you are a legal entity created under French law, every subject of a sovereign that recognizes the French sovereign will recognize the existence of that entity. That is factual information, and that information should be created once in the whole world, and then straight through go to all users in real. Then there is no need for artificial intelligence to separate things and to clarify whatever. But there are many layers of information beyond the factual, and that is the skinny set of information. There's plenty of stuff that comes in various shapes and sizes, because it's also a little bit in the eye of the beholder. And there are technologies like artificial intelligence, natural language processing become very useful and important to solve that. And then also the participation of market participants, contribution of market participants, as suggested by Allan, becomes crucially important. But I think the vocation of the global LEI system is to represent purely factual information and to be basically the skeleton around which a lot of the rest will be organized.
I don't want to belabor the point, but there's one important point to make, and that is not all businesses or LEIs active entities have business registries, because there are many funds that register with security managers. And so really it's a public-private partnership between the various ways that this system can be optimized.
Absolutely. Absolutely, you're right. But here as well, the governments need to clean up their act. We accept, I mean, if you see the economy as a network of contracts, a web of contracts that connects a global population of parties, you can only sue someone if he is a legally recognized party. So all objects that are legally real should be registered somewhere. And if they're not yet, well, it's time to fix it.
Yeah.
We need to
speaking of cross-party, of course.
This thing about registries and company registries it is notable that there seems to be no, and please correct me, and I hope I am wrong, there seems to be no standard for the registration of a business entity. Forget about the LEI for a moment. Just to register a business entity in the 1800 or so recognized business registration organizations on the planet, there seems to be no common standard whatsoever. And so, some of the, and yet business is supposedly, is indeed global, and many corporations are operating in one territory, registered in other territories right across the planet. But the process of registration in different territories is really, I have found it shocking, that the lack of consistency. And we tend to talk as if the only registration authorities that are of relevance are the ones in, shall we say, North America and Northern Europe or Western Europe, that, where there's already a common standard. That's not the problem. The problem is that throughout the rest of the world, there are 1,750 standards. It's and none.
That doesn't really matter. I mean, the real world process that leads to registration can be shaped as the law of the sovereign, and they are independent in that. But once identity is created, it needs to be digitally, and that's where we need to standardize it globally without any leeway.
Yeah. So on.
Agreed.
You mentioned globally, third-party collaboration, inter-party collaboration, and so on. Perhaps, Jeff, could you comment on the recent collaboration between ANA and GLEIF in mapping LEIs and ISINs? I believe we have a few attendees from some NNAs
yes,
on the
certainly.
call.
There's there's been a long-standing development and interest in having the LEI be associated with ISINs, because ISINs security identifiers are issued or identify securities that are issued by entities. And from the early days, it was recognized that this was a very natural mapping. There has been very fruitful discussions over the years that has resulted in agreements between the Global LEI Foundation and the various numbering agencies as part of ANA to perform mappings between LEIs and ISINs. And that responsibility is not done by GLEIF. GLEIF does not do the mappings. The agreement is that the various numbering agencies in jurisdictions will sign up to do that mapping so that they can attest to it. And the participation on that program has reached significant proportions, with most of the major players now involved. And there, on the GLEIF website, there actually is the ability to, in a beta lookup, to do queries and inquiries into LEI and ISIN mappings.
Okay, thanks very much.
If I may just add
please.
a comment, am I correct in that the ISIN mapping is only for new ISINs?
Well, that's part of the process by which this is populated. Is at the time that ISINs are added, that they are updated. However, the responsibility would be with the each particular jurisdiction as to whether or not they want to do a complete mapping exercise or only want to start off with ones that are newly issued. I think that's on a case-by-case basis. I'm not aware of any particular overall policy about that. That's not a GLEIF policy. It's more of a how do you begin to populate. I think it's certainly possible that there are, in fact, agencies that have mapped all of their ISINs to the LEI, and I don't know of any. I'm not sure of the details as to who might only be doing recent ones.
Okay,
we could certainly look into that.
Yeah. Allan, just go back to LEIs and so on. You mentioned registration agents. Could you give a comment on how, in their current format, they're having an effect on the LEI project, and how that might change in the future, or their role at the moment?
Well, the registration agents were placed into the process a few years after GLEIF matured and understood the potential. It was always proposed in the early days to have a registration agent. We called it a certified auditor, and but the registration agent is less than that now. What it is a facilitator for the liaison between the registering entity, the legal entity, and the LOU, thus building up another intermediary function and basically extending the old best practice legacy concept of what ANA was 20 years ago into the future. And this is what has been causing all of our problems, in that we never took a forward-looking view of how to do it. Best practices always gives us a backward-looking view of how to do it. And quite honestly, in the world of competition amongst new age cryptocurrency governments, we're, as a Western civilization, we're in a fight against dictatorial regimes around the world to one-up our financial system with a crypto-based real-time money transfer system built around despotic central government's facilities, and their intent to win out over the reliance upon Western financial system. So we are in a dilemma with regard to getting our future strategized and how to go about it.
Francis, would you like to come in on that question around registration agents and their effect on the LEI process, and perhaps some of the points Allan made as well?
Yeah, one cannot disagree with Allan that introducing another intermediate layer does not necessarily make the system more efficient and faster. At the moment, the logic is, though, that in the absence of engagement by the governments, who are still sitting on their hands when it comes to doing a decent job on identification for the digital age, in the absence of that, registration agents can basically collect entities, motivate them to adopt an LEI, and that can increase registration and then can increase coverage. So it's again one of those workarounds. It's a bit painful. It's adding perhaps a little bit of cost, although the registration agent shouldn't take money, because it's also in their interest to have the whole clientele covered by LEIs. Say the value of the LEI for a legal entity lies in the fact that all the others have it, because then they can organize their data better. So in that sense, it's correct. About this, the high-level strategies Allan mentioned, I prefer not to say much. That is not, it's not in my remit simply to speak about that. But say, when I talk to my athletes I coach and they do a good throw, I say, well, I still know how to do it better, so it's not good yet. And with the LEI system, it's the same. I know how to do it better, so what is there is not good yet. Not because the people who do it do a bad job, not at all, but perhaps sometimes they do the best that can be done under the circumstances where they are left, because they are being let down by the people who could really do the job well.
Okay.
Or could contribute their part.
Yeah. Jeff, have you any comments on LEI registration agents and their current role in GLEIF?
Sure. The registration agent was introduced to sort of increase the fan out and provide a feed into the system initially. The more recent development is, in fact, to extend that concept and eliminate the redundant cost of LEI issuance by using the KYC process, which is a fairly rigorous process worldwide because of AML and CFT, in order to leverage the KYC process at the financial point of origination of accounts to be essentially registration agents that would issue an LEI for little or no cost, which would eliminate the barrier to go from, say, 2 million to 20 million LEIs as an advantage over the years, and would also treat that as a point of entry as registration agents. I think this is an exciting area for potential growth of critical mass to the LEI system, as well as the fact that the GLEIF is involved in verifiable certificates with trust over IP and the self-sovereign identification, in which zero knowledge proofs by organizations that can attest to the validity of registration credentials can establish identification procedures that would allow any type of counterparty to exchange information reliably in terms of identity, be they entities or individuals. So there's a lot of very interesting work on the drawing board that's actually in the middle of being looked into with regards not only to registration agents, but also identification.
Okay, very good. Tom, any comments on that?
Yeah, I have the idea of the whole global local thing is coming under a lot of pressure because it sounds like a very last century concept. But one of the issues I have with the LEI project is that whilst the LOUs are global, if you look at the data sets, with the exception of one or two, most of them have a fairly national cohort of entities that they have registered. And I think that the agent partner referrer model needs to be definitively made territorial. Not necessarily national, but very definitely territorial. And for me, the obvious partner network is through the central banks. And what I think that will do is there are things that occur at a global level, and at a local level, you can be asked, why do you not have them? Why don't you have, and I'll be a little bit facetious here, why don't you have a Twitter account as a company? And it's not like Twitter is represented on the ground in these territories. What is happening is that other companies that you're competing with have taken up this activity. So what needs to happen is that in territories, it needs to become a question about any entity as to why they have or have not got an LEI. And for me, that has to start with, I think it's the central banks, because it gets that global local footprint moving very fast. And when that begins, there will be organic growth to a level that will definitely hit the 20 million and beyond. But without that organic growth, it will feel like a top-down, large company only, financial services company only metric, and it won't generate the level of reliable identity for reliable businesses worldwide that we're trying to achieve.
Okay.
You mentioned only big financial institutions, LEI, and it won't succeed. The only focus of the LEI was to be on financial market participants, broadly described. So how it became, boil the ocean with every entity in the world kind of project, maybe Jeff can describe. He was on the board. How did that become a challenge? How did that shift from financial market participants to every legal entity in the world?
Well, it's not every legal entity in the world. The idea, first of all, was to eliminate some of the barriers to growth in the growth of the LEI because of the cost of renewal and to registration, which for a firm that of a certain size that's dealing in financial markets is a no-brainer. But when you have a smaller to medium business entity that does digital commerce, that does transactions with banks, that could use to have a verifiable identity, and they're asked to pay for business registration, they're asked to go through the process of getting accounts opened and also pay for LEIs. The economic cost of issuing a large number of LEIs to a large number of businesses at renewal rates was an economic cost that was impeding the growth of the system. And so the firms that could benefit from having an LEI are not just the local pizzeria, but in fact are the small and medium businesses that do financial transactions. And so the goal is to enable digital commerce and to know who you can trust in a global economy on the internet with the identification of those entities that are actually doing financial transactions.
If I could just come in there to qualify that, Alan, you're right. And when I said all entities, really what I mean is entities that are trading beyond their individual territory. So not necessarily the pizza shop, but you know what? The pizza company that's buying raw materials in one territory and providing pizza in another territory, not to be facetious, if that company is in multi-currency transactions, dealing in multiple territories and looking for credit and credibility in those territories, I think LEI is really fantastic for that level of business, multinational global business.
Yeah.
And I think that goes beyond financial services. I think we all recognize that now because
I think we are. No, it's okay. We have that robust debate here on the one thing.
Exactly.
When I started this idea in 2006, I came to statistics, having had a career in private sector industry, automotive, global, so a lot of globalization project. And I was absolutely shocked to see the state of data in that whole financial system, to see that behind the fine suits and the nice facades of the towers, there is actually hell in terms of data, and totally chaos. I mean, it's dirty, just dirty, not well done. And as an engineer, that hurts. So I thought the whole thing from the start as every legal entity that moves, that is capable of entering into a contract, must be identified, and in that global world, in a globally standardized way, full stop. And this must be global, it must be universal, meaning every legal entity, every country, and real time. There is nothing short of this that will work. All the rest is old thinking, anchored in legacy culture of pre-digital days, of dirty fixes, where everyone was looking for himself. Now, we have a big gap here that has grown, that we have accepted to grow, is that we use machines that demand data qualities at the global level. We connect them happily. We let them run at speeds that outgun every human brain, every organization. And when it chokes, we have seen the result. We lose control. So I think we need to reestablish the balance here. We want to have the benefits of digital commerce, digital finance, and so on. So I think we need to build the infrastructure that will allow it to work decently without risk. We have built a machine under our feet. There's a sort of a hyperorganism of hundreds of millions of billions of computers that are connected, that exchange data, that we have lost control of, and it's irresponsible. So I think we need to fix that, and the fix will take a long time. I hope we will have it fixed before there is an accident that we can't fix. And the beginning of it is to put a label on every object, like every car has a number plate.
Agreed.
Okay, we've just hit the 46-minute mark, so we're gone a little bit over time. But I think if everybody doesn't mind, I have a few questions here as well. But there's also an interesting question from one of the attendees, which I think will be worth covering. Tom mentioned central banks and so on. But the question is, what role will commercial banks play in registering and verifying LEIs in the future? Tom, seeing as you mentioned central banks, perhaps that I'd ask you, by commercial banks, I think they mean high street banks.
Yeah, for me, I think it's a in terms of scale, and I admit to an interest in scaling out the use of the system. In terms of gaining scale, I think banks are a bit of a no-brainer because they're bang in the middle of commerce. I know it's traditional commerce, but they're right in the middle of commerce. And they are dealing with multiple entities. They have no particular preference for the scale or scope of an entity, and they can define the rules against which somebody might be requested or even encouraged to have an LEI. I know in Ireland, for example, if you're opening a multi-currency multi-currency banking account, you're asked if you have an LEI. So already, I'd imagine in many territories, having an LEI is seen as a benefit for cross-border transactions. And as I said, I just think every bank in the world, every central bank, that's why I mentioned central banks, because of course they are the regulator for their local banking industry. I did not think that the central banks themselves would be involved as the partners for LEI issuance, but I think that they can encourage, if not mandate, their banks to have certain types of business entity registered within the LEI program.
Allan, what do you think of commercial banks or high street banks playing more of a role in registering LEIs?
Well, from the beginning, I always thought it was foolish to engage what now is 200 regulators around the world to try and get this done. I envisioned and still do promote the idea of getting the systemic global financial institutions involved in organizing their own LEIs, getting their hierarchies of LEIs structured, and facilitating the LEI acquisition of their clients. The biggest ones, in my most recent newsletter, I talked about the 8 giant globally financial institutions in the US that come really under one regulator that can be pushed to do this by simply giving them operational risk capital incentives to get it done for themselves and for their clients. It would be a simple process relative to trying to get the boil the ocean by getting every regulator in the world on board. Not only on board, but they have to get on board with each individual reporting structure. We've forgotten that the purpose of this whole thing is risk analysis and risk mitigation. The hierarchies of LEIs that are supposed to be the, quote, phase 2 of the LEI project is floundering. And we're not going to get to meet the objective that we set out initially, or the regulators set out initially, the G20 set out initially for what the LEI is all about. Risk management, the Lehman Brothers fiasco that didn't know that the structures of the Lehman Brothers entities.
So essentially you would focus on the 20 or perhaps even the 1% of entities that are causing 99% or 80% of the problem. I think
So
Allan seems to have cut out there. Jeff, would you like to come in on that question?
Well, it's, as I said before, this is why the GLEIF 2.0 strategy of involving the KYC, know your customer procedures at financial institutions to issue LEIs, essentially at very little cost at the time of opening accounts, is in fact kills two birds with one stone, so to speak. It will basically do the kind of thing that Allan is talking about, of having the institutions be involved in the issuance of LEIs. It will also reduce the cost and increase the adoption rate. At the same time, because of the through the fact that with discussions with the CAB Forum, which is responsible for the use of certificates and certificate authorities, the LEI is very close to being included as one of the reference elements that can be included in certificates. And another strategy that's involved here is, in fact, for GLEIF to under its a certificate authority to allow institutions themselves to have the certificate authority to issue certificates to their staff and employees that would have the LEI within the certificate, and that those officers acting as roles and contracts can use that information to identify not only the institution, but also the officer or the individual. And this also bridges a gap between risk management, which is not just for entities, but also for actors. So I do think that the KYC process for institutions as a point of intermediation or contact in the financial system. And it's true, the initial goal was in fact for improved systemic risk management because of the lack of knowledge. I do believe that in fact that this information will get further enhanced and robust as it matures. And in fact, there are a lot of institutions that don't necessarily have parents. There are a lot of institutions that are not part of large holding companies, but it's quite true that there needs to be some improvement to move forward such that we have a system in place that can in fact assist us before the next crisis, which is unfortunately a little bit of a race.
Yeah, if I may come in.
Yeah, please do.
I have two remarks. I hope Allan is back.
Yes.
I'm here. I'm sorry I faded out. I wonder where
Excellent.
I faded out.
Excellent. So Allan, just on what you said, two things. One, I think the solutions we have mentioned here that come from the commercial sector, all second best. The best solution is to have government that issues LEI systems alongside the creation of the identity at zero additional cost. Of course, they must clean up the registration mechanisms, but it's no good excuse to keep registration mechanisms in the digital age. Then we don't have the problem you mentioned with all the regulators for each collection system and so on. For instance, in the EU, at the moment, there are a number of people in several institutions working on the concept of an EU directive that would make the LEI compulsory for all legal entities in the EU, full stop, once. Then it can be used by everyone. And risk management is not only for regulators collecting data and trying to create statistics and so on, hopefully in real time, because Lehman didn't wait for the 3 months it takes, but it's also for the legal institutions, so the financial institutions and other businesses. Say, for instance, when Fukushima happened, how many companies and industries did not know whether they would be affected through some suppliers wiped out there? In the COVID crisis, how many companies discovered that their suppliers were shut simply the day the components stopped arriving? When you talk about ESG investment, how do you know that the car you're selling, that all the components are made according to the ESG criteria if you don't know the whole Christmas tree of the whole maze of suppliers or the contracts? So I think risk management happens in business. And if people see what they're doing, if businesses know what they're doing, there is less risk. I say what I see today, and I tell my colleagues at the ECB as well, because not everyone understands there either, is that managing a crisis in the digital age will be ever more like entering into a boxing ring with a blindfold. And you're told your opponent 10 seconds ago was there. Dong. And you go and get your nose full of hits. And you might even find at some point that there are two opponents in the ring and one of them has a knife, but that you will only know when you have the knife between your ribs. So we need to have artificial senses that work at the speed and scale of the system, nothing short of that. That's why I won't give up on that.
Hey, Francis, I just
another fantastic metaphor there. I think we're just coming up to 5 minutes to the hour. So we've gone about 10 minutes over time, which I think is fine. It's a very interesting discussion, and the vast majority of our participants and attendees have stayed on, so they're obviously very engaged in the discussion. I think one thing we can all agree on, and our panel can all agree on, that this is an incredibly complex, incredibly challenging project to take on, and you know, if the panel was all in agreement, it would make for a very interesting webinar. But perhaps as well, one other thing that we can all, the panel could agree on is the role of, again, we're running over time, but this is my own interest coming in here, is one other thing the panel could probably agree on is the role of the government and the legislator to ensure that legal entities are obliged to sign up rather than trying to come up with incentives. Tom, what do you think?
Yeah, and to track back a little bit, Francis touched on the supply chain issue. If there is going to be organic momentum, I have a feeling it'll be out of supply chain. I think that if I can answer your question, Fionn, say yes, I definitely think the sovereign needs to encourage.
Yeah. Jeff, what do you think?
Well, that's how the LEI got launched, was mandates for trading derivatives and then equity markets with MiFID II and so forth in Europe, which is, and it's been very effective to that extent. However, the global LEI system itself was a cooperative, non-treaty cooperation of G20 governments around the world. And as much as I appreciate the desire to have all governments mandate all things for all people, and I think Francis's fully automated system is a nice goal and objective, I think if we cannot necessarily count on the participation, voluntary, of all governments of the world to mandate all things. And I do believe it's a collaboration of multiple dimensions in which the private sector and the public sector will cooperate in the best ways they can to achieve the goal. There are, as pointed out, risk management activities for institutions as well as for systemic risk. And there are just basically identity information knowledge about people that are just doing digital commerce at a smaller scale.
Yeah.
All of these things, all these things can be facilitated, but I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all solution.
Allan, very quickly on maybe last word on the role of the sovereign role of governments in mandating LEI registrations.
Well, yeah, the reason we got governments and G20 involved was because the quote unquote collective action inertia of the financial industry. They couldn't do it themselves. Now we have a collective action problem of the sovereigns and the regulators around the world. They pay lip service to doing it, but they don't. I think we need to go back to the original ideas that were promulgated in the discussions back in 2012 and my earlier papers in 2004, which basically said we need to get the globally systemic financial institutions collectively, there's only 100 of them in the world, 8 in the United States, to put their foot to the pedal with a regulator saying you will be responsible for getting your operational risk capital reduced if you do this, and we want you to do this. They have a special space in the regulator's mind. They are defined as systemically important. They're a new category, and we need to push them to get their hierarchies of LEIs into the system, their LEIs for their entire financial structures into the system, and we need to push them to own their clients' LEI registration. If we do that, and we get the auditors on board to certify, we then can do what Francis said, directly into a system without, and I'm sorry if this is heretical to the LOUs on board here, but then we don't need LOUs doing manual process and building databases. We need them to be nodes, regional sovereign nodes on a blockchain.
Okay.
That's what I have.
Fantastic. We've just hit 4 o'clock there, but Francis, you look like you're chomping at the bit there to say something.
Yes. Now,
very quickly.
Going back to Jeff, my dream is not that all governments in the world would now unite and move. No, I believe in transformational power. And I think that if one significant government or economic area moves, the businesses in there will experience benefits. That's, oh, certain things now just flow. Wow. For instance, US banks will run to their government and say, hey guys, our European competitors now, their systems become smoother, their risk management becomes better on 90% of their business. And for us, it's only on the 10% of business we have in Europe that we see that improvement. We also want it in the US. I think that's how it could become an avalanche. And once the big countries have joined, they will tell the small ones, if you want to play with us, stop being so dirty, join in. That's what I hope. And until we get a first big one to move, I think what is being done at the moment by the GLEIF with the GLEIF 2.0, so basically bringing in registration agents and what Allan proposes, that makes sense. It increases the population of LEIs and helps more people to see the value of it. But really, we need to move the governments doing it. Identification, so the identity creation process should be straight through from the law to the LEI system and basta. Then we will have a clean infrastructure.
Okay. Okay. I'm sure we could keep the conversation going. You know, I think we've covered a range of topics there, each one worthy of a PhD thesis in itself, and not deserving of the 10 or 15 minutes that each topic got. But I'm really sorry that we will have to leave it there, and hopefully we can get everybody back together again. We can get the gang back together and continue the debate and the discussion. And I hope everybody enjoyed it. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll be in touch after the webinar with a recording. And thanks again. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Much appreciated.
Thanks. Well,
thank you guys.
Cheers. Bye.
bye.